7 o'clock. Good morning. Dominic Steele here for Daily Bible Time on, Easter Thursday, the day before Good Friday. Hope you can join us tomorrow for Good Friday Church, villagechurch.sydney, 9:30 in the morning. I'm just trying to get my head into what it would have been like to have been a disciple of Jesus at this time in that first Easter and everything that's going on. Let me jump into character. I mean, we've seen Jesus. We've been hanging around him 3 years. We saw him walk on water. We saw him raise the dead. We saw him feed 5,000. We saw him carve up those religious leaders from the temple in Jerusalem like you wouldn't believe. But these last 24 hours, it's all gone upside down. He wouldn't let us fight for him in the garden last night after dinner. I mean, what a dinner. He spoke of eating again with us when he comes into his kingdom. And then what happened to Judas, with Judas? What a spin out. Coming with the soldiers, the arrest in the garden, then Jesus was taken away and arrested. And there was so little point following. I kind of wanted to follow, and then Peter did, and then Peter chickened out, and Jesus then he got beaten up by the temple soldiers and then beaten up by Pilate's soldiers, and Jesus has been mocked and Jesus has been spat on. And they wrote a sign calling him the King of the Jews and stuck that up above the cross, and then they mocked and called him Son of God. Wow. And all the time he was silent. He wouldn't take the drink that they offered him. I mean, it was a backhanded drink. It was sour wine. But what I don't get is why? Just at the moment of his death, he seemed to falter. My God, why have you forsaken me? He cried out. I mean, that's the quote people are going to remember him saying. Did he lose confidence in his dad, the Father, or is this just another one of his sayings that we're going to understand later? What happened in that final moment at the cross? And why is this death the most important death in history? Why is this death so significant to our lives today? That's the little exercise we're going to explore in Daily Bible Time today. This complex and important subject. It's the most important of subjects. I want to start today with the nature of God. First, our God is Trinity, 3 persons, 1 God, Father, Son, Spirit, all distinct persons, all one God. Second, our God is love, 3 persons relating perfectly to each other, so perfectly that God can be described as love in 1 John 4:16. The Father and the Son have been in relationship for all eternity. This perfect relationship of love continues after Jesus comes into the world. Jesus loves his Father. Jesus does exactly what his Father wants him to do, John 8:28. The Father loves the Son and shows him all that he does, John 5:20. Their relationship is so deep, so close that Jesus can say, I am in the Father and the Father is in me, John 14:11. Jesus says in Matthew 11:27, all things have been committed to me by my Father. No one knows the Son except the Father. And Jesus says in John 10:30, I and the Father are one. There is an intimacy between the persons of the God. It's such an intimacy. And it's been that way for all eternity. Third, our God is holy. He's pure. His purity, his otherness from sinful humanity. God is so pure and we are so wicked. The prophet Isaiah feared for his life in the presence of the holy, holy God. He knew he was unclean. John wrote, God is light and in him there is no darkness at all. God cannot stand sin. And yet God in the Old Testament has promised that he would lay on his servant the iniquity of us all, Isaiah 53:6. Now that afternoon in Jerusalem 2,000 years ago, we've spent all this time looking at the last week of Jesus' life, and it all climaxes this weekend as we zero in on tomorrow and his actual death, and on Sunday on his resurrection. Today we pick it up in Matthew 27 and verse 45. From noon until 3 in the afternoon, darkness came over the whole land. Darkness, symbolic of judgment, the judgment of the Father on the people, the judgment of the Father on the Son. Verse 46, about 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eli, Eloi, lama sabachthani. That is, my God, why have you forsaken me? Jesus is suffering the ultimate anger of his Father. Jesus is conscious of being abandoned by his Father. And for one who knew the intimacy of no one knows the Father except the Son, such an abandonment must have been agony. It is a suffering unparalleled in all of history. We can't know in what ontological sense the Father and the Son, what exactly is going on. We can't know, we're not told. What we can say is What we're seeing here is the most profound love between the Father and the Son, colliding with the most profound wrath. The Father puts on Jesus. Jesus bears the sin of all humanity. When Jesus prayed the night before, Father, if you're willing, take this cup from me, he knew he was about to suffer God's ultimate wrath, a suffering unparalleled in all of history. Jesus endures the wrath. Christ continues to trust his Father. He calls out in the height of his agony, my God! But he is at this moment fully experiencing the wrath of the Holy God. And he goes through that for me, for you. There's a massive conspiracy, some conscious, some unconscious in our society, to downplay the extent of my rebellion against God, your rebellion against God. It's almost at every level. It's how we deal with offence against each other in our society. Our kids were taught a dispute resolution method in primary school where no one does anything wrong, where they have to see both sides to think about it from the other's view. People don't go to prison anymore in our society to be punished. They're locked up by the Department of Corrective Services to be corrected. And to talk of offence against God, that we have ignored God, that we've taken the good things of life from God, we've taken him for granted, used him and abused him. And yet it is the view of the Bible, it is the view of the Holy God that his creation ought to honour him, that we ought to honour him. And we haven't done that, we don't do that, we do things we ought not to do. We think things we ought not to think. We say things we ought not to say. We don't do things that we ought to do. We don't think things that we ought to think, and we don't say things that we ought to say. In so many ways, we've offended God, and God is affronted and angry. And it's because of our offence against God that we cannot face the holy God, that we can't be accepted by him. We can't be in relationship with him. We can't be friends with him. But look what Jesus' death achieves. This is why Jesus died. First, Jesus' death opens the way to God. Sentence 50. Jesus shouted again in a loud voice and gave up his spirit. Suddenly the curtain of the sanctuary was split in two from top to bottom. The earth quaked, the rocks were split. There is a massive earthquake. But more significant than the earthquake is in 51, the curtain of the sanctuary was split in two from top to bottom. That's the curtain in the temple in Jerusalem that blocked the way to access to God. And at the moment of the death of Jesus, that curtain is ripped in half, top to bottom. And it's God who does the tearing. The way to God is now open. Jesus opens the way. Christ's suffering, Christ's death on the cross was him experiencing the full extent of the wrath of the Holy God on my behalf. So I have access to God because he took the punishment for me. What incredible love, what incredible mercy. It's because Jesus was forsaken that I, that you, sons and daughters of the living God, need not be forsaken. And this tearing open of the curtain, it's the clear indication that the temple system is over. It used to be that priests would bring their sacrifices to make up for the wrong things that people had done to God, and the high priest would offer a major sacrifice once a year, and only he would go inside the curtain to the presence of the Holy God. But now with that curtain opened, with relationship with God free and available, the Jewish sacrificial system over. Sin has been dealt with. So on the one hand, the death of Jesus means sin is dealt with and access to God is now available. But on the other hand, the death of Jesus and his subsequent resurrection means that our final resurrection, it's possible. The very next sentence gives a foretaste of that. 52, the tombs were also opened and many of the bodies of the saints who'd fallen asleep were raised. And they came out of the tombs after his resurrection and entered the holy city and appeared to many. I don't know what you think of that verse 52 and 53 of chapter 27. To be honest, I've spent years feeling a little shy, perhaps a little embarrassed about that verse. It's been a skip over verse for me. But over the last little while, I've done a 180-degree turn because I think I've come to understand it. Here's where my head now is. When Jesus dies for us, he dies for us so that we can be accepted by God into heaven, so that we can live forever with him, so that we can have a life beyond this life. And so what is described here? At the moment of the death of Jesus, the access way to God, it's flung open. But at the moment of the death of Jesus, life beyond the grave becomes possible. And what we see here is a taster, a foretaste, a sample, a proof for some people coming back to life. What kind of bodies did they have? Natural bodies like Lazarus, or supernatural bodies? How old were they? Do they die again? How many people saw them? How public were their appearances? I can ask a whole stack of questions, but none of them are important compared to the big fact. Life beyond the grave is happening. Death is not the end. I'm going to talk much more about this tomorrow in our Village Church Good Friday service, and I really hope you can join us online, 9:30 a.m, villagechurch.sydney. It's a very important day. I'd love you to join us.